Hey everyone, welcome back. In our last video, we learned how we can create a form in Google Docs and then set up a Google developer project to be able to read that data back into our PowerShell. Today, we're going to expand upon that by adding in email integrations so that you can have it processed through each new entry and then send an email based upon the information provided. If you didn't watch the last video and you just want to learn how you can use your Gmail account to send emails through PowerShell, that's okay too. This video is broken down into different chapters so you can easily find what you want. Now let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do in order to do that is go back into our form and go into settings, and then we're going to go to the form defaults and tell it to collect email, right? We'll just set it to responder input. If you set it to verify, that makes the person log in with a Google account. We'll just trust them to enter in a correct email address. When we do that, we'll see that when we go back over to our form, it's now added in an email address column in here. So when new responses to the form are filled out, they will be prompted to put that information in there. But I'll go ahead and paste the test email box in here so that we have something to test with. And then what I'm actually going to do as well here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove our API process column. So we're going to treat this just like a brand new form like we did last time, except for this time we have email addresses added to it. Now what we need to do is set up the developer account in order to be able to send emails on our behalf. So if I go back into the console.cloud.google.com dashboard here, we still see our form development project from last time. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a new project for this. Now this one's going to be specifically for sending emails. Right? That way you have a separation of roles, right? If you have one project or one service account and you put everything, all the permissions that you could possibly need on it, and that gets compromised, then that person's going to have access to everything in the world, right? Where here, when you have the different separations, you're only going to get one thing potentially compromised if you lose access to one of these. All right, so I'm just going to create a quick project, send email, and then just like last time, we're going to select our new one. Doesn't do it by default sometimes. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to enable APIs and services. So just like last time, except for this time, we're going to select Gmail API and enable. So now we have the Gmail API enabled. We need to give it credentials. All right, so last time what we did is we came in and we created a service account. We could do that with a Google Sheet because I can give the service account permissions to that Google Sheet. I cannot do that with Gmail because this is a personal account and doesn't have the organizational ability to come in and be able to do that. But what you can do instead is setting an OAuth 2 client ID. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to create an OAuth client ID. In order to do that, though, you must first configure a consent screen. And this is a screen that will pop up the first time you try to log in using this to confirm that you want to do that, right? So we're not an organization, so it's got to be external. We give it a app names and support email, and then the only other thing that you need to do is enter in a email address, so whatever your Gmail is on there. And then what you need to do is you need to give it scopes, right? So I'm going to come in here and we have all of our Gmail API items, right? I could come in and give it read, compose, send, permanently delete all your email from Gmail. Again, if it gets compromised, it's not really something I want somebody to have access to, right? So we'll give it the minimal permissions of manage drafts and send emails because that's all we really need it to do. So we add that to our scope. And then test users. So this actually will publish out to the Google Store and people would go in there and you got to go through a verification process, all these type of things. If you're just using something for yourself, right, you can have up to 100 test users to come in. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add myself in here again. So that will let me go through and authenticate with this application without having to have it go through all the publishing and things like that, right? Just keeping it internal to myself. So now I have the OAuth consent screen. Now I can come in here and I can create my OAuth client ID. So application type, it's going to be a desktop app. We'll just call it PowerShell. Right, and then it gives you a client ID and a client secret. So like we did previously, right, we don't want these values to be saved inside of our script. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use our set secret here again to set secrets for these specific items. So at this point, I'll never have to have them in my scripts. And this way I don't have to remember to clean them out when I upload them to GitHub for everybody watching this. All right, so we'll go ahead and create the Gmail client ID. And then we'll set the secret. Okay, so now we have client ID and client secret. We can use those inside of our scripts at any point to be able to get data in and out. Right? And the way that we're going to actually send these emails, because the UNM Google module actually does not have any email integrations. It only works with docs. So what we're going to do is we're going to install the Malazar module. After that, we can go ahead and we can test sending an email. Start by importing our module, and then I'm just going to set the account that I'm sending it from and an account that I'm going to send it to. All right, just a couple of test emails. And then we'll go ahead and get that client ID and that client secret back from our vault. And then we're going to use the connect OAuth Google function here to be able to get back our authentication. So if I run this now, see it popped up automatically and says, please choose an account to send email from PowerShell. And I choose my account. It's currently being tested, so we're in developer mode. So we'll go ahead and set continue, and then it'll give you the prompt here. All right, so if you trust this, go ahead and continue. Verification is completed. I can close this, and now I am authenticated with Google. If I run this again, I don't receive that same prompt, because actually what this does is it uses the Google API, has a little DLL on your machine, and it actually saves this off into your app data. So there's a little file that gets saved in there. So if you move this script to a new machine, you will be prompted again, right? So it's based upon the machine and the profile. So you need to remember that if you're setting this up to run as a service or as a recurring item, right, you need to be able to have that authentication in there. So next, now that we have authentication, we can go ahead and send the email. Right, so we're going to just pretend that we're the wizard, and we're going to send it to Gmail. Give it some text, give it a subject, let everything else be the defaults. Right, so auto, we're doing OAuth, send our email message. There we go. See, our status is true, sent to message, and I should be able to go over here and verify that we just received this email. So now that we know we can send an email, we need to see about how we can integrate that in with our current form automation. So if we look at our previous automation, we see that we had the one for each loop here. Remember, we had our business logic written into it to be able to determine what to do, and then we updated that as processed, right? What we're going to do this time is we're actually going to split this into two separate loops, right? We're going to have one loop that's going to go through and it's going to find the new entries. It's going to use the logic to determine what it's going to do with that. And then once it gets through all of those, then a second loop is going to run to send out those emails, right? There's a couple reasons and some logic behind why you would want to split things up, right? You could have something go wrong in one process and not the other, and you don't want to stop one process because another process had an issue, right? So if it's able to process through all the APIs but it's not able to send the emails, that's fine. It can run through one time, do all the APIs, and then the next time the script runs, it can just pick up where it left off and just try to send all the emails on the next go around. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're just going to copy the first half of our script here onto a new window. All right, so just our function that we had for getting the column letters, getting our token, our spreadsheet, and then the spreadsheet data. All right, and then we had also written in some custom logic to be able to get the API processed column, right? This was the column that we just added to the sheet that we knew was going to mark that we've processed this particular entry, right? And we built in the functionality to determine whether or not we had actually had that built in there or not. All right, so we'll go ahead and add this into our new sheet. All right, and this time though, let's go ahead and make our column a variable. All right, so column header really should be used in this manner. Right? Instead of hard coding that in there, we'll go ahead and make it a variable. And we'll see why here in just a minute, because we are going to add a second column as well. In order to confirm that the entire sheet has this column added, right, we only need one entry. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and get the first entry. So we're just going to do entry equals sheet data select object first one. All right, it doesn't really matter. We can get the first one, last one, doesn't matter. Like I said, all we need is one, right, to be able to run through this logic and see if we need to add a new header or not. So if we go ahead and run this as is right now, right, we should add back in the API processed column. So you can see we got an error message here saying that we've exceeded the grid limits. The max rows are 105, max columns is 5. And that's because if we come and we take a look at our spreadsheet here, there is no column after E, right? So there is no column F as we would expect before. When we first created this form, that went all the way down to K, but to show this to you guys, I went through and deleted all of them. So we want to take a look at how we can add in a new row, because by default, the Google Sheet will not add in a new row or a new column if it doesn't exist. Row is easy because there's a dash append to the commandlet, but a column is a little different. You can't just add in a column. So if we take a look at the API itself here, we can see that we can send a request to the spreadsheet ID with an append dimension to column to be able to add additional columns. All right, so how can we account for all of this, right? That's quite a kind of a mouthful that we put in there, right? So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to put in a try catch on our code. All right, so we'll tell it error action stop. So if any error occurs on this commandlet here, it's just going to stop, right? And then here I just added in just a fake temporary variable name, because the way that a try catch works is anything that comes into the catch is automatically added into this $ underscore, but this is not available once you've finished running in the current context. All right, so if we just run this little chunk here together, we see here's our response data that we had before that we expected, right? That is just saved to this FOO object. All right, so if we dig down into that, we can see that we need to get the error details. And the error details has .message on it. We take a look at that. That is actually some JSON. We can convert from JSON, and we can see now we have some data that we can work with. Right, so we can go ahead and we can save that to variable, and now we can see what our full error message was. All right, so range response, exceeded grid limits, max row, max columns. What do we do with that, right? So what we want to do here, right? Because right now the way that this works is you have the error action stop that's going to go down into the catch, right? So any error that you get is going to catch, all right? But we're only concerned right now with if we've exceeded our grid limit, right? We want to know if we exceeded our grid limit, and if we do, we want to go ahead and fix it, right? So what we can do is we can add in some additional logic. All right, so actually what I'm going to do first is I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to set this back to our underscore so that once the catch hits, you'll get that new error that will be put in there. And then we'll do an if. So if error message matches exceeded grid limits, so that just, if it has the text exceeded grid limits in it, then it'll hit inside of this, which is what we would expect. All right, then we're going to calculate the number of columns to add. And I'll put an E on the end there. So, unfortunately, this is just a string, right? So in order to get it, but it does tell us what our max columns need to be, right? But what we need to do is we need to be able to extract that out, right? So we could say it is the last character on here. I could just write something to, grab that last character out. But you don't know if it's going to stay that way, right? You don't know if it's going to, if it's 25, right? Then it's actually the last two characters. You don't know if, maybe max column and max rows will get swapped by the API at some point. You can never tell these type of things, especially when dealing with, third-party things like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little regex. So what this part here is telling us is we're looking for max columns, right? We want to find something that comes after that. That's what this part here is saying. So after max columns, space, we want to find any set of numbers. All right. So now if we run this here, we'll see that that's just going to get back our 5, right? So we can set our max here to 5, and so that we know that's what the current maximum is on the spreadsheet. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get our number of columns that we have plus 1, because we're wanting to add 1, right? And then subtract the max, and that's going to let us know how many we're going to add. Chances are it's going to be 1. It usually will be 1, unless you're adding multiple columns at one time, but we've calculated that out to 1 so that, if it's not 1, if it's 2, anything like that, you don't need to worry about that going through your script. You don't need to do any loops until it finally stops saying that, right? This first time what it's going to set, what it's going to be, right? So if we take a look back here, we see that what we need to do is we need to build out a request with append dimension, sheet ID, dimension columns, length 1. Right, we're not adding a row, so we can leave this part of it out. But we can go ahead, we can build that into a PowerShell object. All right, so we're just going to create a hash table, requests, append dimension, sheet ID, dimension columns, length, add, and then we'll get all that and we'll convert to JSON. Right. The nice thing about doing it this way is I could have taken this JSON and copied it into a string and added some appends and things like that in here. But if you do that, if you're just trying to do string manipulation in that manner, you yourself will have to account for any escape characters or anything that maybe JSON can't do. Versus if you build it out as a PowerShell object and then convert to JSON, it's going to do all that for you. So if I just run this here, we'll see that we got our JSON. The next thing that we need to do is we actually need to get our sheet ID, right? That should be blank, but obviously there was one left in here for my testing. But because right now we just have the sheet name, right? So we need to go ahead and calculate out or figure out what the sheet ID is. Luckily, there is a commandlet for that, the get sheet ID. So like just with all the other ones, we pass the access token, we pass the sheet name, pass the spreadsheet ID, and that is going to give us our sheet ID. So now we have all the information for our JSON here to be able to add in our new column. And then we can go ahead and set it up to where we're going to send that data directly to the API. So again, if we look back here, we are expecting a URI of Sheets Google v4 spreadsheet, the spreadsheet ID :batch update, and our method is going to be post. So we'll just build out an invoke request method here to be able to get that data. So we'll build out a URI, we'll insert our spreadsheet ID, and then our invoke REST method with our method of post. Body is that JSON that we just built up. All right, and then authorization as our access token. If you actually look at the UMNM module, this is all it does every time that you're sending a request to there, right? So we could submit a PR. We probably should submit a PR to be able to add this automatically into the UNM module. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and we'll leave it in our code. All right, and then what we need to do is then try to insert that column header again. All right, so again, we're just using our splatting, the same one from up here, because it's all going to be the same parameters again, right? But we don't need to spell it all out because we still have it saved. And we're going to go ahead and keep that stop on there, because if it does fail, we want to know, right? Because the rest of our automation is not going to work if we do not get this column added onto our spreadsheet. All right, and then to finish it out, we'll go ahead and we'll add in an else throw underscore, right? So if our error message does not match this exceed grid limits, just throw a terminating error like you would with anything else. So we have this now, so it's going to detect, okay, we've exceeded the grid limits. We need to go ahead and add that new column in there, right? And then once we've added that new column, go ahead and append to it, right? So if we go ahead and we run this real quick, set a couple breakpoints on here. All right, so we see that our spreadsheet has no column F, and that we are expecting column F. All right, so if I go ahead and step over that, we should now see we now have a column F. And then we're going to run our set gsheet data again to set that header. And there it's been set. All right, and then one more thing that we'll want to do is actually go through, instead of just having a blank column that gets added in there, let's go ahead and create a default value to put in the other columns. All right, so I'll just go up here, add default value, and then we're going to come back and we're going to use the same exact logic that we did here in our first spreadsheet, right, where we're getting all this data here, and we're setting the columns and the rows and everything. We're gonna take that data down here after we've added in our new column header, right? We're gonna come back in here and we're going to set the default value for each existing row. So we'll just do a for each through all the sheet data, calculate out what the row is, and then set the column. Right, so we know what the column is going to be each and every time because we've already calculated what that column is. It's going to be F all the way down. All right, so if we come down here, we delete our F again. So one more breakpoint, then we can go ahead and we can run this. So we see that we've hit down on here. We got our column F, we got our row 2. All right, so the header's already been added back in. Continue. There we go. We added new in there. Right, so we know each time it's going to go through, it's going to hit those new, and we're good to go. So we have our default data. We're adding in that column automatically before anything else in the script processes. Right, and this is a perfect item that we can now turn into a function. All right, so if I'm going to come up here, I'm just going to remove these values that I had set previously, and we'll come up here, and now we'll add in a function. Just call it add sheet column, and we'll set the parameters for our access token, our spreadsheet ID, spreadsheet name, what the column header is, and what the default value is going to be. So we'll come down here and just close out our function. And there you have it. Now we now have an add sheet column function in here. And so what that's going to allow us to do is we're actually going to add 2 columns to our spreadsheet this time. All right, we're going to have the to process header, and then we're going to have the action header. So like I mentioned, we're going to process through this sheet twice. Once to do the initial logic on it, and then a second time to send the email. So we want to be able to record what the logic is from the first go through, so that we know what to send inside the email. So we'll go ahead and add in our 2 columns here. So we're going to first confirm the process header. So we get our access token, the column header, sheet name, spreadsheet ID, and then our default value will set to new, and add sheet column. And then we'll just update that same hash table again, but this time setting it to the action header, and we'll just go ahead and set that one with a default value. So if we go ahead and we run this, we now see that we have both columns added into our spreadsheet. Now what this means as well is we don't need all of this logic inside of our for each every time to be able to check for that column number. We're adding it beforehand. We can get that cleanly and easily each time that we run through. However, we do still want to make sure that it has been added. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new function to go through and just simply run this line here to ensure that this has been processed. And then if it hasn't been, we'll get rid of all of this in here and just throw a terminating error letting us know, hey, you forgot something, right? And that information, so that you'll know that you need to run that add sheet column inside of your script. So our function will just be get sheet column, pass in the entry, the column header. It's going to do the same index of as before, but this time if it equals -1, it's going to say, hey, you forgot to add this sheet to the column first, right? And then otherwise it's going to return back our column letter. And what this is going to allow us to do is use this over and over and over again without having to keep copying things like this and having these big long commands that come through. It's just a nice quick short way to get that information. And then finally, the last thing that we need to do is, since we are adding new columns in here, right, we need to ensure that we're getting our data after those columns have been added. Right, so the get sheet data needs to come after the column added lines. That way, it will logically be able to have those. So now we can go through and we can do our for each again to be able to determine what to do, based upon the data inside the spreadsheet. All right, so this time we're going through, we're doing our to process header. So again, this is set as a variable. This actually works in PowerShell. You don't need to, it doesn't have to be hard written in there. A variable will get mapped in to an object that way, so that you will always, that we could change to process header to anything we want at the top of this script, and everything further down in this script is still going to continue to work just as expected. All right. So we'll get our data and our information, determine what to do with that. This time we're going to go ahead and we're going to save the action to take to a variable. All right, so just pretty much the same as we did last time. Right? We determine what to do. Except for this time we're saving it to a variable so that we can then write that back into our original spreadsheet. Right? So get the row just like we've done every other time. Then we're going to get our toProcess column and our action column. And then we can go ahead and update the sheet. Right? So in this time, instead of just one variable, right, we do need to actually give it both. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to set the toProcess column to email, right? Just the word email, and then the action to take whatever we determine was the value up there. Right? So that will allow us to append both of those together here on the spreadsheet at the same time. All right, just one command sends them both out there, and we can get our data. So if we go ahead and we run this as it is now, all right, we still had our write output so we can see what was going on, but we also see now that our action and our processing columns have been updated. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to get our sheet data one more time. All right, so we've updated that sheet. That doesn't automatically update the object inside of PowerShell. We could build some additional logic into this, for each here to be able to update all of that and try to get it, make sure everything's mapped. But again, you're gonna introduce more complexity. More complexity could lead to more issues in your automations, when we can just use one simple command and get our sheet data again. So now we get our sheet data again. We see that we have our API processed, our action, and everything, and then we can go through that data and send the email. Right? So we'll go ahead and go back to the top of our action here, add in the information for connecting to the Gmail, and then the logic for sending the emails. Right, so starting with getting the OAuth credential object, right, same as we did before, just get the client ID, the client secret, the Gmail account. And since we've already run this on this machine, we don't need to worry about it prompting us, but it does still need to get that token again. And now what we're going to do is this time our toProcess header is we're going to process ones that equal email. The logic behind this being, right, if something goes wrong in here, right, but there was ones from last time that still had email, they'll get processed, right? If something goes wrong in the email, that'll fail out. You can fix it. Next time it runs, it won't process through here, but it will process down here, right? So you're separating those out into separate processes so that one is not overstepping on the other. All right, so we're going to send our mail message again, from the wizard to the email address that they put on the spreadsheet. Text, we'll just reply back with what our action, survey results for, what is your name? So we filled it out. And then all the rest remain the same from last time as well. Now again, we're gonna put another try catch on here. The reason behind is if one email fails to send, right, we don't want to stop the ones that are going to happen after it, right? So if somebody put a bad email address, or there wasn't an email address, or something happened, even if it was just a blip on the on the network and it didn't properly send that request, right? We want to know that, but we don't want to stop the processing of all of the other requests, right? So if we put a try catch on here, and we're just going to get back our message, and if you remember from the previous script, the return value from this contains a status of true if it was able to send the email. All right, so this time on our catch, we're just going to set it to null. All right, so that if it doesn't send the email, we know it's not going to trigger the if statement that we're about to write. So if message.status, which is it's a Boolean value, so if it's true, the message got sent. If that message status was set to true, only at that point will we go through and we'll update our spreadsheet and set our toProcess column to done, right? So as mentioned, if one thing goes wrong during the process, one of the emails doesn't send, the next time the script runs, it will send that email. All right, so if we go ahead and we run this full process here, we'll see that it's actually not going to process these entries here again because it's already done that, but it will go through and get the emails that our emails came in. So again, Sir Lancelot is good to go, and the other two folks are getting thrown off of a cliff. So one of the things that I always try to figure out is when do I want to separate actions like this? Why did I want to have it process whether or not to throw somebody off of a cliff up here, and then come down here and send them the email letting them know that? Right. The logic behind that is the first process is something that is happening completely internal to my machine. Right. This is logic that is running in here. There's no third-party connections or networking or anything like that that would be able to interrupt this logic in here. The second part, there is, it's going out to a different system, right? So the fact that it's going to a different system, it opens up more possibilities for issues and for errors. Right? You could write it all into here, into one, and then do the same logic at the end where you don't update into the status unless it has processed the logic and sent the email and done all that. Right? You certainly could do that as well. It's just depending on your automation, how you want things to work, how you need them to run. You can build in some certain redundancies here like this, right? So if this process up here, we're talking, this takes milliseconds to run, right? So it's probably really not worth splitting it out in two, but this shows how you can, if you're doing some complex logic or something that takes a couple seconds, maybe even a minute to run, you don't have to run that every single time. Even if it fails to send the email, you've done the original part. You don't need to run it again. You're just going to come down to the second for each and send the email the next time that it runs. As you'll see, this will come in handy in future videos where we'll take this script and have it run unattended on a schedule. This way, you don't have to sit there and push F5 every single time you want it to run. You can set it up on a schedule. And we'll look at multiple different ways that you can do that. This way, your script is constantly polling and you're able to get that data as soon as it's being added and take your actions as quick as possible. That's all I have for today. I appreciate you watching. If this is the type of content that you enjoy, please give it a like and subscribe. And please feel free to comment if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. You can also find me on most social media at mdoust. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you all again next time.